Bruno hadn't moved in 76 days. Not when the keepers brought him fresh fruit. Not when the children called his name, but when one small hand pressed gently against the glass. Everything stopped. The birds, the children's laughter, even the wind. His massive frame shifted, and as he stood, slow as thunder rising from the earth, the world fell into a hush so deep, even time forgot how to breathe. A little girl with freckles didn't flinch, and the gorilla, forgotten by the world, reached out. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Cascade Wild Sanctuary sat tucked between thick Oregon evergreens. The late spring wind soft against its steel and glass structures. The city of Portland hummed quietly in the distance. But inside the sanctuary, time often moved at its own pace, especially near the gorilla enclosure. Bruno had not moved in over 2 hours. The silverback gorilla sat motionless in the furthest corner of the enclosure. Legs folded, arms resting on the earth like the roots of some great tree. He wasn't sleeping. His amber eyes were open, half-lidded, staring at nothing, or perhaps at something far beyond the visible world. There was a strange stillness in him, the kind that made zookeepers hesitate to speak too loudly around the glass, as though they were in the presence of someone grieving aloud in complete silence. Bruno had once been Cascade's most engaging resident. Visitors remembered him for his expressive face, his slow, almost theatrical movements, and the way he would sit by the observation window and gently mimic children's gestures. He had become a symbol of the sanctuary's success in emotional bonding between humans and great apes. The staff had once affectionately called him the quiet philosopher. But everything changed after Kira died. Kira had been his companion for years. She was smaller, spirited, and fond of clapping her hands to draw attention. They had shared food, play, and long stretches of grooming beneath the shade trees. But a sudden illness took her in the span of days. When Bruno found her unmoving, he had howled until his voice cracked, and after that, he never made another sound. Dr. Samantha Reyes, the sanctuary's lead veterinarian, watched him from the overhead platform. She wore her usual tan ranger jacket and kept a pair of binoculars slung over one shoulder. Though she didn't need them to see that Bruno hadn't touched the food enrichment puzzles left for him that morning. He hasn't interacted with anything. Not the toys, not the staff, not even the keepers he used to trust. She said into her recorder, "That's 12 weeks now, he's slipping away in her late 40s. Samantha carried the bearing of someone who had seen many kinds of loss. Tall and angular, with short gray-streaked hair and a deliberate way of speaking. She had been at Cascade for nearly 2 decades. She wasn't sentimental, but Bruno's silence affected her more than she let on. The sanctuary board had already begun discussions about removing him from the Echo Interaction Program, a system that allowed for supervised connection between certain animals and visiting children. Bruno had once been the face of it, but now, they feared the emotional damage might be irreversible. A gorilla who refused to respond was no longer an ambassador for interspecies empathy. Samantha scribbled a note, then closed her binder with a sigh. "He's not aggressive." She murmured to herself, "Just gone." Miles away in southeast Portland, Jack Grace stared at a kitchen table covered in old photographs. Morning light filtered through the window, landing across a half-eaten bowl of cereal and the pink shoelaces of a child's sneaker. Jack was a single father, 37 years old, with dark brown hair that had grown too long and eyes that seemed permanently ringed with sleeplessness. He used to paint murals for schools and cafes, pieces filled with swirling birds and soft clouds. Now he worked part-time at a hardware store and rarely picked up a brush. Since the accident, he hadn't been able to return to the places they used to go together. On the fridge was a faded photo. His wife, Elise, laughing in a raincoat beside a much younger Willow, who held a stuffed elephant and wore mismatched socks. That was taken at Cascade Wild Sanctuary, just outside the gorilla enclosure. Elise had loved it there. So had Willow. Willow Grace was now 5, small, with light brown hair and a quietness that wrapped around her like a second skin. She rarely spoke these days, except in short phrases, and only to her father. She often hugged her elephant toy, Mimi, and watched the world with wide, unreadable eyes. "Hey," Jack said softly, kneeling beside her. "I was thinking, maybe we could go somewhere today. Somewhere we haven't been in a long time." Willow looked at him, not speaking. Jack took a breath. The zoo. Her expression didn't change, but her hands tightened around Mimi. Jack wasn't sure if she remembered what happened there, the gorilla, the programs, the animals Elise used to narrate like fairy tale characters. But she didn't protest, and for now, that was enough. He stood up, grabbed his keys, and slipped his phone into his pocket. "We'll go slow," he said. "Just walk around, no pressure." Willow followed, quietly, like a shadow, just a step behind. At the sanctuary, the clouds gathered slightly. The wind picked up, shaking the young pine trees near the entrance, inside the gorilla enclosure. Bruno hadn't moved. Samantha glanced at him once more before leaving the platform. "You have to come back to us. Big guy," she whispered. "Before they decide you're already gone." The sky above Cascade Wild Sanctuary had dimmed into a patchwork of light gray and soft gold. Oregon, springtime often wore its melancholy like a shawl, cool and quiet, with the sun peeking through only when it had something meaningful to say. The trees swayed gently, and somewhere near the Primate Trail, a tour group of third graders in bright green t-shirts stumbled past, led by an enthusiastic young guide in cargo shorts and a voice too cheerful for the day. Willow Grace didn't follow them. She had wandered slightly away from her father, not more than 20 feet, though Jack hadn't noticed. He was busy reading the sanctuary's updated map, marked with eco-friendly rest zones and sensory quiet spots. He looked up just as she came to a stop in front of the gorilla dome, small and motionless, her stuffed elephant dangling by a threadbare ear, inside the enclosure. Bruno had not moved all morning. A few visitors had tapped the glass. Some had made noises or waved leaves, trying anything to coax a reaction. He had ignored them all. Instead, he sat with his back toward the crowd, head dipped low as though listening to something inside the earth. Until Willow pressed her hand to the glass. She didn't bang, she didn't speak. Her palm simply rested there, flat, small, warm against the cool, transparent barrier. Her other hand clutched Mimi, her stuffed elephant, like it was the only thing anchoring her to the moment. She didn't blink. Bruno stirred. At first, it was nothing more than a breath, his ribs rising. A slow exhale, then came the turn. He lifted his massive shoulders and shifted just slightly, enough for the keepers watching to exchange glances. A teenager near the glass gasped. Someone took a photo. The low murmur of the crowd faded into silence. Bruno stood. The movement was slow but unmistakable. His towering body unfolded as he turned toward the girl. His eyes, dulled for weeks, locked onto her face, and then, in a moment that would be replayed in a dozen memory reels and whispered in staff meetings for years. Bruno walked forward, deliberate, calm, toward Willow. He stopped inches from the glass. The crowd held its breath. Then he raised one hand, his right, and placed his palm precisely where hers touched, separated by 2 inches of reinforced polycarbonate, but united in something deeper. His fingers, wide and weathered, matched hers like a shadow cast by love. Jack dropped the map. He moved toward his daughter quickly, instinctively, but didn't interrupt. Something about the moment demanded stillness. He crouched beside her, watching Bruno with eyes gone wide. Willow said nothing. She simply looked up at the gorilla, unblinking. In her face was something ancient, soft recognition wrapped in the veil of childhood, across the observation deck. Samantha Reyes arrived in a hurry, her boots thudding against the wood. A keeper had radioed her moments earlier. Bruno's up, he's at the glass. Now she stood frozen behind the 2-way panel, her gaze locked on the scene in front of her. Maya Chen, the intern with the always open notebook, stood beside her, scribbling in awe. He hasn't done that since. "Kira," Maya whispered. Samantha didn't respond. She watched Bruno's posture, the slow breathing, the head slightly tilted. "Who is that girl?" she asked. Maya shook her head. "She came in with a man. I can check the list." "No," Samantha said. "Wait, I need to see something first." Not far from the platform stood a docent named Elliot, in his mid-60s. Elliot had been volunteering at the sanctuary for over a decade. His gray hair curled beneath a wide-brimmed ranger hat, and his navy vest was covered in faded pins from previous animal awareness campaigns. He had a reputation for remembering faces, human and animal alike, and an endless supply of sunflower seeds he occasionally slipped to the squirrels. He wandered up behind Samantha, sipping from a thermos. "He hasn't done that in a while," he muttered. Samantha nodded. "The girl, does she look familiar to you?" Elliot squinted. "Hard to say, but that stuffed elephant. What about it? I remember a girl who used to bring one just like that. She and her mom came every Sunday. 2 years ago, maybe Bruno used to come right up when they sat near the side window, back when Kira was sick." Samantha blinked. "You're sure I'm old?" Elliot chuckled. "But I remember that toy, pink ear, torn seam, eyes half gone. And that elephant's seen things." Samantha turned to Maya. "Pull Echo program records, 2 years ago, see if there's a Willow on the participant list." Maya nodded and hurried off. Back at the glass. Bruno hadn't moved his hand, neither had Willow. Jack finally spoke, his voice low. Like he was in a church. "You okay?" "Sweetheart." Willow nodded slightly, her lips parted but no words came. Jack watched the gorilla. "Is this the one you wanted to see?" She nodded again, this time a little firmer. "Did you remember him?" Willow tilted her head, thinking. Then she whispered, barely audible. "He remembers me." Jack looked down at her in stunned silence. He hadn't heard her voice in weeks. A woman nearby sniffled. A child asked, "Why is the gorilla sad?" but was quickly hushed by her teacher. Bruno exhaled, slow, deep, his eyes, framed by lines of age and loss. Blinked once, then he sat back, but not fully away. He remained close to the glass, still watching Willow, like he was anchoring himself to something once lost. Maya returned, breathless. Samantha found it. Willow Grace, participant in Emotional Echo program, attended with her mother, Elise. Weekly sessions for 5 months. Samantha closed her eyes. She was the one, the infant participant who spent the most time with Bruno during Kira's decline. Elliot let out a soft whistle. "Well, I'll be damned." Samantha looked toward Willow, now seated on the floor, leaning against the glass, her elephant in her lap. Bruno mirrored her posture, his massive frame almost tender in its quiet reflection. Samantha whispered, "After all this time, she's the only one who still speaks to him," Elliot added softly. And she didn't even have to say a word. Rain misted lightly over Cascade Wild Sanctuary, a fine gray veil that blurred the outlines of trees and buildings into softened shapes. The air smelled of wet bark and old stone, and puddles gathered quietly between the stepping paths that crisscrossed the visitor walkways. Inside the gorilla observatory, the lighting had dimmed to accommodate the clouded sky, casting a gentle amber tone across the viewing dome. It was the kind of day that made everything feel slower, like the earth was holding its breath. Samantha Reyes stood in the sanctuary's archives, a narrow, climate-controlled room at the back of the administrative wing, surrounded by rows of carefully labeled files. Her fingers moved quickly over drawers marked with years and program codes. She had been searching for nearly 40 minutes, her jaw tight with concentration. A mug of half-finished coffee sat on a nearby desk, forgotten and cold. She finally stopped at a drawer labeled EE Participants 24-month. She pulled it open and began flipping through the files until her hand paused over one marked Grace. Elise, Willow. She drew it out, eyes scanning the pages. Weekly visits, emotional echo trial. Attended by mother and child, age of child. 3.5 years, gorilla partner. Bruno. Samantha exhaled slowly. A photo was clipped to the corner, a child sitting beside a reinforced glass wall, her tiny palm pressed upward on the other side. Bruno loomed, his face only inches from hers, eyes curious and calm. In the background was a woman with long dark hair and a tired but warm smile, Elise Grace. Samantha stared at the image. It was her, and the elephant. Mimi was right there in the child's lap. "You remembered him," she whispered aloud, "but he remembered you first." She took the folder and walked back toward the main office, her boots echoing against the concrete floors. Meanwhile, back at the observatory, Willow remained seated by the glass. Jack had tried to coax her to lunch, but she wouldn't move. Not from this spot, not from Bruno. She had taken out a small sketch pad from her bag, an old one with crumpled edges, and a unicorn sticker half peeled on the cover. Inside were faint pencil marks, shapes not fully formed. Willow's drawing style was instinctual and sparse, more emotion than precision. She pulled a crayon from her pocket, a red one, broken in half, and began sketching. She drew a large figure first, curved and heavy set, then 2 arms wrapping around something small, a shape like a heart, big and glowing in the middle of the gorilla's chest. Around them, she drew spirals of lines, as if the entire world radiated from that single hug. Jack watched her from a nearby bench, hands clasped between his knees. He had spent most of the morning in awe of what he'd seen. His daughter, who hadn't said more than 3 words a day since Elise passed, was now drawing again, sitting straight, breathing deeper. A woman approached from behind, a visitor like any other, at first glance, but she stood with unusual stillness. Her name was Megan Holt, a behaviorist recently hired part-time by the sanctuary for her expertise in human-animal trauma bonding, in her late 30s. Megan was compact, with a neat braid that fell down one shoulder and eyes that flicked quickly between details. She spoke little, but wrote often, and carried a small leather-bound notebook in her coat at all times. She had worked with war veterans and therapy horses before taking an interest in zoo environments. She leaned close to Jack and said softly, "Is that her drawing?" Jack looked up, cautious but polite. "Yeah, may I?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Megan crouched beside Willow and watched as the girl quietly peeled the sketch from her pad and walked to the glass. She flattened it against the surface using both hands, pressing it right where Bruno had placed his palm earlier. Bruno stirred, his eyes locked onto the red drawing, his head tilting in a slow arc of recognition. His breath fogged the glass. Then, deliberately, gently, he tapped the panel with the flat of his hand 3 times, then 2. A pause. Megan stood slowly. "That's not random," she murmured. Jack blinked. "What do you mean? It's rhythm, pattern, like call and response." She drew a memory, and he answered with 1. Willow watched, unmoving. Then she raised her fingers and tapped the glass back. 3, 2. Pause. Bruno responded again, this time adding a slow sway, side to side, a movement not aggressive, but deliberate, ritual-like. Megan stepped away, her mind already cataloging the behavior. "Do you know if she used to visit often?" Jack shook his head. "I didn't think so. Elise might have taken her on weekends, but I never thought she'd remember." Megan nodded slowly, then said, "I think he's been waiting for her." At that moment, Samantha returned, the folder in her hand. She passed it quietly to Megan, who flipped through the pages with rapid understanding. "It's all here," Samantha said. Willow and Elise came regularly. She wasn't just a participant, she was the only child Bruno consistently approached during Kira's decline. They used glass play, memory sketching, rhythm tapping. It was part of a cognitive pairing experiment. Megan looked up, and he never forgot it. Samantha turned to Jack. "Mr. and Grace, your daughter had a connection to Bruno years ago. It may have helped her emotionally during that time. We didn't know how deep it went, until now." Jack looked at Willow again. The little girl who had been so lost in silence and dreams for nearly a year was sitting cross-legged on the ground, as if it were the most natural place in the world. Her eyes were calm, her breathing even. She looked like someone who had returned home. "I don't know how to explain this," Jack whispered. "But she seems more herself now than she's been in months." Samantha nodded. "That's the thing about memory. Mr. Grace, sometimes it doesn't live in the mind, sometimes it lives in the body, in the hands, in the space between a drawing and a window." Bruno tapped the glass again. 3, 2, pause. Willow smiled, small, but undeniable. And Bruno exhaled softly and sat, still facing her. As though he had waited all this time for her to draw that heart, the rain had passed by morning, leaving a glistening sheen over the city of Portland. Puddles caught reflections of overcast skies and power lines like mirrors to a faded memory. The trees in Jack Grace's neighborhood dripped steadily, leaves whispering secrets with each breeze. His house, small, white-paneled, and flanked by 2 maples, felt quiet in a different way now. Less like emptiness, more like pause. Inside, Jack stood before a blank canvas that had been tucked behind the hallway closet for nearly 3 years. It still had flecks of old paint from a forgotten project, a sunrise over Mount Hood. Half-finished, abandoned shortly before Elise died. His fingers hovered over a tin of graphite sticks and charcoal pencils. Dust had settled over everything. He wiped it clean with a dish rag. He hadn't planned to draw, in fact. He had told himself dozens of times that he was done with art. Too personal, too raw. But last night, as he watched Willow asleep, her elephant plush tucked under one arm, the edges of a crayon sketch still clutched in her fingers, he felt something stir. Not a roar, just a nudge. A quiet knock at the door of a heart sealed off too long. He picked up a pencil. At first, his hand trembled, then slowly, it began to move. Lines took form, not perfect, not symmetrical, but urgent. He drew Bruno first, the broad sweep of the gorilla's back, the slope of his head bowed gently toward something small. Then Willow curled against him, barely taller than the arc of Bruno's chest, around them. He sketched forest, not bars or glass, but trees bending overhead, light filtering through branches like sanctuary. He didn't stop for an hour. When he did, he stepped back. The drawing was rough, incomplete, but it said what he could not. Bruno wasn't just a gorilla. He was a witness, a protector, maybe even a bridge, that morning. Willow sat quietly in the kitchen, eating dry cereal with one hand while drawing with the other. Jack watched her from the doorway. He hadn't heard her hum in almost a year. The melody was soft, barely there, something Elise used to sing while folding laundry. Willow didn't look up as she did it, but Jack stood there, blinking fast, suddenly overwhelmed later that day. He called Samantha Reyes. "Can we talk?" He asked about Bruno and Willow. She agreed immediately, and by afternoon, Jack and Willow were back at Cascade. The staff had made subtle changes to the observatory since last week. A cushioned mat now lay near the glass where Willow liked to sit. A low table held drawing materials and laminated animal diagrams. It was clear the sanctuary had quietly begun investing in this strange reunion. Megan Holt, the behaviorist, met them at the entrance. She wore a deep green jacket, damp at the cuffs from light rain, and carried a canvas notebook satchel across her shoulder. Her dark hair was pulled into a braid again, and she smiled at Willow with quiet warmth. "He's been waiting," she said simply. Bruno was already at the glass when Willow approached. He lifted his head. His massive frame shifted slightly forward, slow and gentle. He didn't touch the glass today, he just watched her, eyes soft and steady. Jack stood back, hands in his pockets, not interfering. Samantha joined him. Her usual clinical demeanor was softened by what she'd seen over the past days. "She's making remarkable strides," she said, speech, posture, eye contact. "And we're seeing parallel progress in Bruno. He's resumed basic foraging behavior, even vocalized once yesterday, just a low huff, but it counts." Jack nodded. "I've been trying to understand it. I thought she was running from the pain, but maybe she's running toward something, toward him." Samantha looked at him carefully. "Or maybe they're running toward the same thing, memory, something they both lost." Jack hesitated, then reached into his messenger bag. He pulled out the drawing, Bruno and Willow in the forest, and handed it to her. "I didn't mean to make it," he said. "It just came out. Samantha studied it. You haven't drawn since." "Since Elise," Jack said quietly. "But yesterday, I heard Willow humming Elise's song, and it just unlocked something." Megan joined them, peeking at the drawing. Her eyes lingered. "Do you mind if we scan this? It could be part of the behavioral record, maybe even emotional reinforcement for Bruno." "Sure," Jack said, blinking. "I mean, yeah, of course, nearby." Willow had finished another sketch and pressed it gently to the glass. It was of Mimi the elephant, drawn as if she stood beside Bruno, tiny but proud. Bruno leaned closer, nostrils flaring. Then, to everyone's surprise, he mimicked Willow's drawing motion. He dragged a finger across the inner surface of the glass, forming a crude line in the condensation. Jack watched it all in silence. Something inside him softened, as if a fist slowly unclenched. "Did you know," Megan said, "that gorillas mourn?" Jack glanced sideways. "I'd heard that, but I thought it was more instinct than memory." "It's memory," she said, "and grief. When Kira died, Bruno stopped responding to anyone, but he didn't forget, and I think, just like Willow, he carried that grief like a locked box. And today, Maybe they're both finally starting to open it. Jack looked back at the glass. Willow had turned to him, her small hand waving for him to join her. He walked forward slowly and sat beside her. For a moment, the three of them, man, girl, gorilla, sat in stillness. The light overhead caught a thread of dust and turned it golden. Willow leaned her head against Jack's shoulder and whispered, "Bruno knows I miss her." Jack closed his eyes, and everything inside him changed. Spring deepened its hold on Oregon, the air warming with the promise of summer, but still perfumed by damp pine and wet earth. At Cascade Wild Sanctuary, blossoms unfolded along the walking paths, and new leaves shimmered in morning light. It had been 3 weeks since the day Bruno placed his massive hand on the glass for Willow, and each week since. The ritual had continued, quiet and unshaken. Saturdays became sacred. Willow would arrive with Jack in the late morning, always holding her worn elephant plush, Mimi in one arm, and a new drawing folded under the other. Sometimes she'd wear her rain boots even when it didn't rain, claiming Mimi liked the squish-squish sound. Jack never corrected her. Bruno would already be waiting, not pacing, not withdrawn, but seated near the front corner of his enclosure. Around him, the area had transformed. Where once there was only scattered straw, now sat a woven arrangement of hay, shredded paper, and soft cloth bits. He arranged them in circles, sometimes stacked, sometimes layered in spirals. The keepers watched in awe. Bruno was nesting. "It's not for sleep," said Samantha Reyes. Watching from the observation deck, it's intentional placement, and he only builds it near the glass. He's building for someone else. That morning, Willow carried something new in her arms, Mimi, but not just for her. She had wrapped the plush elephant in a folded scarf that once belonged to her mother, a soft lavender knit, frayed at the ends. The scent long faded but still somehow warm. Jack walked beside her, quiet as always, but there was less worry now in the set of his jaw. Since Bruno came back to life, so had Willow. She laughed more, slept through the night, drew constantly, and she had started calling him Dad again instead of nothing at all. At the glass, Bruno lifted his eyes. His body was relaxed. But when he saw the scarf-wrapped figure in Willow's arms, something in him stilled completely. Willow didn't speak. She approached the glass, knelt, and carefully placed Mimi in front of her. Then she gently pushed the plush up against the window, as high as her arms could reach. Bruno leaned forward, his breath fogged the glass. He didn't take his eyes off the toy, and then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so large, he mimicked her. He placed his open palm against the glass, directly across from Mimi, then slowly. He lowered his body until his great chest was level with the toy. He folded his arms like he was cradling something. His lips parted. A deep, barely audible sound vibrated through the air, a humming rumble of contentment and recognition. One of the keepers watching from a distance wiped their eyes. Willow pressed her hand beside the plush, and Jack crouched next to her. "She's safe now," Willow whispered. "She can stay with him." Jack didn't answer, but his fingers found her shoulder and stayed there. That afternoon, news arrived. Cascade had received word of a rescued infant gorilla, found orphaned in a logging zone outside Cameroon. Malnourished, terrified, but healthy. Her name was Zara, and she was due to arrive at the sanctuary in less than a week. The board had already approved trial placement. Bruno would be observed for potential surrogate behavior. The announcement stirred a quiet hope among staff. Megan Holt, ever careful in her observations, voiced her caution. If Bruno accepts her, it could help complete the emotional cycle, but if he rejects her, after all this progress, Samantha nodded. Then we watch. We guide. We trust the bond he's built with her. She glanced toward Willow, who was now sketching quietly beside the gorilla dome. Zara arrived the following Friday. She was tiny, barely 20 pounds, with wide amber eyes and tufts of wiry black hair that stood up like dandelion fluff. Her limbs trembled, her fingers constantly curling as if to grasp something no longer there. A crate was placed gently inside Bruno's enclosure. The door opened slowly. Zara peeked out, hesitant. Bruno sat a few yards away, unmoving. Willow stood behind the glass with Jack and Samantha, silent. Her small hand hovered just above the window. Zara took one cautious step into the open, then another. Bruno lowered his head, not submissively, but reverently, and shifted forward, slowly, deliberately. He made no sound, no sudden movement. When Zara froze, he froze with her. When she reached a trembling hand forward, he leaned down and let her touch the thick fur on his arm. A collective breath released around the enclosure. Bruno sat back, opened his arms slightly, and let the baby crawl onto his chest. His eyes closed, his great hands encircling her without pressure. The infant rested her head against him, already trusting. Outside the glass, Willow watched, unmoving. Bruno looked up at her, and with one hand still around the tiny gorilla. He lifted the other toward the glass, pressing it gently where hers had always been. Jack leaned in, his voice low. Steady. You helped him find his heart again, and he helped you find what you thought was gone. Willow turned her face to his, her eyes bright. She'll be okay now. Later that month, a mural was installed beside the gorilla exhibit, painted by Jack. It depicted a forest in warm golds and deep greens, with rays of light streaming through treetops. In the center stood Bruno, holding Zara close, and beside them, Willow, smiling, a red crayon in her hand. Off in the distance, just barely visible in the painted sky, a faint silhouette of Elise stood among the clouds, hands folded, eyes watching. Above the mural, a title in bronze, Echo Bonds. Samantha reopened the program under the same name. Megan designed the emotional protocols. Jack provided the art and visual therapy elements. Willow became the story, and Bruno waited at the glass, every week, his hand ready, his heart full. Sometimes, healing doesn't arrive like thunder. It comes gently, through a child's quiet drawing, a gorilla's waiting hand, or the tender gift of a forgotten toy, in Bruno's story and Willow's. We are reminded that grief doesn't mean the end of love. It means love is still alive, waiting to find its way home. Maybe this was more than memory. Maybe it was a miracle, a moment stitched not by chance, but by the hand of a God who sees even the smallest heart in silence. When two broken souls, one human, one beast, find each other again after years of loss. It's hard not to believe that something divine is at work. Maybe this is how God whispers, through connections we thought were lost, through the ones who never stopped waiting for us. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below if you believe in second chances. And if you believe God still works in mysterious and beautiful ways, write Amen in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let's keep spreading stories that remind us. Some bonds are bigger than words. Some love never dies, and some miracles walk on 2 feet or 4. May God bless you wherever you are.